We rise from the perusal of Wuthering Heights as if we had come fresh from a pest house. Read Jane Eyre is our advice, but burn Wuthering Heights. This was people's favorite love story? What? That's weird. Okay. Did anyone understand what was going on? Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Let's See Where This Goes, or whatever this is. We're still workshopping the name. Today, I was considering looking into Wuthering Heights because recently a new film adaptation of Wuthering Heights has come out. So, full disclaimer, I don't know if I really care to go watch it. And part of the reason, actually, a big part of the reason, is I did have to read Wuthering Heights when I was in high school, and I hated it. I did not like this book. I don't really understand why it's as famous or as popular as it is. And part of the reason I want to look into it is to remind myself, was this plot as weird and unhinged as I remember from all those years ago? Why were we forced to learn this book in school? And why? Why do we, why? You know? Just why? I know there's a lot of drama surrounding this movie with Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi, and I've only heard bits and pieces of the tea, and we'll probably address some of the tea as we go through it, but I'm by no means a tea expert. I've just been hearing there's a bit of controversy or controversy, as they might say across the pond. I am curious to remind myself of Wuthering Heights. Maybe I was just too young and stupid when we had to read this book in school, and maybe I just really didn't get it. I don't know. Or I still hate it. I don't know. So I'm gonna find out today if my thoughts and feelings about this book have changed. And without further ado, here we go. Here's the Wikipedia article about it. I understand that one method of figuring out if I still hate this book or not might be reading the book, but I decided no. I'm just going to look up the Wikipedia article and remind myself of the plot that way, and we're just going to go from there. I think I'm going to probably go on some clicking adventures to remind myself of this period of history in particular. I do think that's relevant to the story when Wuthering Heights took place, and also the author herself, Emily Brontë, and her pretty famous literary sisters, Anne Brontë and Charlotte Brontë as well. So Wuthering Heights, I feel like, has the claim that it does, largely because Emily Brontë was a Brontë sister. I know that they all published under pen names that were male sounding pen names, so people would think that they were written by men. We'll find out more about that as we click through. I think that's kind of part of it, is the novelty of all of these sisters being writers. All of them died pretty young, is my understanding. I did a brief click throughs of their history. They pretty much all died in their 30s, and they were all authors. So I think there's a bit of novelty to that. I think it becomes more significant because of who the authors were and kind of how untimely their deaths were. So there's maybe this feeling, especially when people die young, tragedy of that, and they might have shown promise when they were young of oh, what else could they have possibly created in their lifetime? I do understand that, but I do think Wuthering Heights kind of had, I think, through time, that's kind of why we see it has reached the acclaim that it has. Largely, I think, because Emily Brontë died when she was 30. So I think a lot of the people I know that really love Wuthering Heights or really are into Emily Brontë are also often, anecdotally from what I've seen, usually women who aspire to be writers. And usually a lot of people, when they become authors, don't have their biggest book come out when they're in their 20s. And they don't really peak as authors when they're that young. But Emily Brontë wrote this book, presumably in her 20s, considering the age that she was when she passed away. And it became this very significant piece of literature. But I think it's partially because she died when she did, and the family that she was from, and this feeling of well, what else could she have possibly written? So Wuthering Heights is the only novel by English author Emily Brontë, initially published in 1847 under her pen name Alice Bell. It concerns two extensive upland estates and their landowning families on the West Yorkshire moors, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, and their turbulent relationships with the Earnshaws' foster son Heathcliff. Driven by themes of love, possession, revenge, and reconciliation, the novel is influenced by Romanticism and Gothic fiction. It is considered a classic of English literature. Wuthering Heights was accepted by publisher Thomas Newby, along with Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey, before the success of their sister Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre. But they were published later. The first American edition was published in April 1848 by Harper and Brothers in New York. After Emily's death, Charlotte edited a second edition of Wuthering Heights, which was published in 1850. Though contemporaneous reviews were polarized, Wuthering Heights has come to be considered one of the greatest novels written in English. It was controversial for its depictions of mental and physical cruelty, including domestic abuse, and for its challenges to Victorian morality, religion, and the class system. It has inspired an array of adaptations across several types of media. So I do want to look into Emily Brontë here. Here we go. I'm just curious about learning a little bit more about Emily Brontë, her background. So Emily Brontë, born July 30th, 1818, passed December 19th, 1848, so she was 30 years old when she died. She was an English writer best known for her 1847 novel, Wuthering Heights. She also co-authored a book of poetry with her sisters Charlotte and Anne entitled Poems by Kerr, Ellis, and Acton Bell. I think those were all their pen names, since Emily Brontë wrote under Ellis Bell, and I think her sisters wrote under Kerr and Acton Bell, so people thought that they were men writing these books. Yeah, Wuthering Heights came out basically a year before she died. It seems like Emily was the fifth of 6 Brontë siblings, 4 of whom survived into adulthood. I would argue just barely, given that a lot of them passed in their 30s. Her mother, Maria Branwell, died when she was 3, leaving the children in the care of their aunt, Elizabeth Branwell. Apart from brief intervals at school, Emily was mostly taught at home by her father, Patrick Brontë, who was the curate of Haworth. Haworth was a civil parish. What is the curate? Is a person who is invested in care. Okay. So Patrick Brontë was an Irish Anglican clergyman and author who spent most of his adult life in England. He was the father of writer Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Brontë, and of Branwell Brontë, his only son. Patrick outlived his wife, Maria, by 40 years, by which time all of their 6 children had also died. So he outlived his wife and all of his kids by like a lot. That's kind of wild. I'm kind of curious about this family. At Guisley, Guisley, I don't know. Brontë met Maria Branwell, whom he married December 29th, 1812, in the Church of St. Oswald. They moved into a house on Halifax Road, where their first 2 children, Maria, who survived 1814 to 1825. They named their first kid Maria also. That's interesting. So Maria died. Oh, she doesn't even have her own. Okay, so the first Maria doesn't even have her own Wikipedia page, but Maria Branwell died age 38. And Maria Branwell also wrote, it appears, Maria had 2 children, Maria and Elizabeth. They were born in 1813 or about 1814, 1815. Their other children were Charlotte, Patrick, Emily, Jane, and Anne. And Maria Branwell died on September 15th, 1821, after 7 months of severe poor health. The cause of death was understood to be uterine cancer at the time, but contemporary scholars suggest either cervical cancer or chronic pelvic sepsis and anemia brought on by the birth of her youngest daughter, Anne. That is painful. Wow. So Patrick Brontë, the father of all the Brontë sisters, outlived his wife and outlived all of his children. That's wild. That's really sad, actually. So back to Emily Brontë. She was very close to her siblings, especially her younger sister Anne, and together they wrote little books and journals depicting imaginary worlds. She was described by her sister Charlotte as solitary, strong-willed, and non-conforming, with a keen love of nature and animals. Apart from a brief period at school and another as a student and teacher in Brussels with her sister Charlotte, Emily spent most of her life at home in Haworth, helping the family servant with chores, playing the piano, and teaching herself from books. Her work was originally published under the pen name Alice Bell. It was not generally admired at the time. and many critics felt that the characters in Wuthering Heights were coarse and immoral. In spite of this, the novel is now considered to be a classic of English literature. Emily Brontë died in 1848, age 30, a year after the novel's publication. It was not well received at the time that it was written. I understand why, and I do think part of the legacy of this book is the Brontë family and the fact that all of them basically died pretty young. So I think it's just the promise of like what their lives could have been is also part of it, right? I don't know. Maybe not. There's like different sections of her for her personality and character, which is interesting. With the exception of Ellen Nussey and Louise de Bassompierre, Emily's fellow student in Brussels, there's no record of Emily having had friends outside her family. There is no evidence that Emily was ever in love or that the passionate relationships depicted in Wuthering Heights were based on personal experience. Emily's closest friend was her sister Anne. Inseparable in childhood, they shared their own fantasy world, Gondel, right up into adulthood. I am curious about her cause of death, which appears to be likely tuberculosis. Oh no, her brother died of tuberculosis. Okay. Emily's brother, Branwell, died, probably of tuberculosis, on Sunday, September 24th, 1848, following a long descent into alcoholism and drug addiction. At his funeral, a week later, Emily caught a severe cold that quickly developed into an inflammation of the lungs and may have accelerated an existing condition such as tuberculosis. It has been suggested that Emily's health had been weakened by insanitary conditions at home, where water was contaminated by runoff from the church's graveyard. Though her condition worsened steadily, Emily rejected medical help, saying that she would have, quote, no poisoning doctor near her. On the morning of December 19th, 1848, Charlotte, fearing for her sister, wrote, "She grows daily weaker. The physician's opinion was expressed too obscurely to be of use. He sent some medicine which she would not take. Moments so dark as these I have never known. I pray for God's support to us all." At noon, Emily's condition had worsened. With her last audible words, she said to Charlotte, "If you will send for a doctor, I will see him now." But it was too late. She died that same day at about 2 in the afternoon. According to Mary Robinson, an early biographer, Emily died on the sofa in the living room at the parsonage, which she had adopted as a bed. A letter from Charlotte to William Smith Williams describes Emily's dog, Keeper, lying by her deathbed. Oh, that's always like so devastating. It's always devastating when people die, but the animals, like, it always breaks my heart because it's like, how do you explain to them? You don't, right? And you know that they're grieving too. Emily died less than 3 months after Branwell's death, which led Martha Brown, a housemaid, to declare that Miss Emily died of a broken heart for love of her brother. Emily had grown so thin that her coffin measured only 16 inches wide. I think my laptop is 16 inches wide. That's, oh my God. Like, my laptop, I'm pretty sure, is 16 inches. Her coffin was 16 inches wide. The carpenter said that he had never made a narrower one for an adult. Her remains were interred in the family vault in St. Michael and All Angels Church, Haworth. In 2024, the memorial at Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey was altered to correct the misspelling of the family name from Brontë to Brontë. Her legacy, her literary impact. Although Emily's work was not widely appreciated at the time of its publication, Wuthering Heights has subsequently become an English literary classic and is described in John Sutherland's Longman Companion to Victorian Fiction as the 20th century's favorite 19th century novel. In 2007, it topped a Guardian poll of the nation's favorite love stories. What? We're going to go through the plot again later. I didn't feel like Wuthering Heights was like a good love story. It's like a very messed up. It shows like very toxic, dysfunctional relationships, no? So a Guardian poll, Wuthering Heights is one of the UK's favorite love stories? I'm sorry, what is this? The passionate romance that proved that ardor can survive Britain's grimmest landscape and weather has beaten countless steamy successors in a poll of the greatest love stories of all time. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, recounting the doomed affair between sweet Cathy Earnshaw and the brutal outsider Heathcliff, has seen off Shakespeare, Gone with the Wind, and everything but Barbara Cartland in a survey which shows the lasting power of classic works. What? Okay, these are the things that people are voting for. We're like, Wuthering Heights. Pride and Prejudice, I guess I get. Romeo and Juliet, also, like, insane. Yeah, this is just one of those things where it's like, Wuthering Heights, I think, has reached such critical acclaim. Did anyone understand what was going on? This was people's favorite love story? What? That's weird. Okay. Wuthering Heights has been adapted many times, both in the UK and elsewhere, for radio, film, stage, and television. The earliest adaptation of the novel was a silent film in 1920, directed by A.V. Bramble. Actors who have portrayed Catherine Earnshaw include Juliette Binoche, Rosemary Harris, and Merle Oberon. And the actors who have played Heathcliff include Ray Fiennes, Laurence Olivier, and Tom Hardy. In 2025, Emma Rice premiered a stage musical adaptation of Wuthering Heights in Sydney, starring John Leader as Heathcliff. In 2025, it was announced that a new film adaptation was in production, directed by Emerald Fennell, starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. This is interesting because I know that one of the biggest things that has come out, at least recently, that I've been hearing is that people were upset when they asked Emerald Fennell, like, why she cast a white guy to play Heathcliff when in Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff is not white. And I'm not saying I defend. I don't even know exactly what it was that she said in response. I'm not defending this, but it's like there have been a lot of people historically who have played Heathcliff who are also very white. And Heathcliff is, like, not white in the book. So that was interesting. I don't know if people are as mad about Jacob Elordi being white as they are about Emerald Fennell's reaction to the question, I think. I don't know all of the beef there, but I know that that's something people are upset about. If other people understand what's going on, feel free to drop it in the comments. But yeah, I don't know. All right, so Wuthering Heights. Let's go back to this. I'm curious about the plot. I think we're just going to do a quick read through of this plot here of Wuthering Heights. I feel like this book was confusing to me when I read it in school. I remember it doesn't take place chronologically, and I think you're reading things that are like in a letter, and then sometimes things are happening in a dream, and I was like, what's going on? So anyway, the plot of Wuthering Heights, the opening. By the way, I'm going to go through the whole plot here, so if you don't know anything about Wuthering Heights, you're planning to see the movie of Wuthering Heights, and you don't want spoilers, I'd say maybe, skip ahead. But maybe skip this one if you don't know anything about this book and you want to just find out and go along for the ride. In the movie, I imagine the movie also has taken some creative liberties, so this might not be exactly what happens. So the whole plot of Wuthering Heights, the opening. In 1801, Mr. Lockwood, the new tenant at Thrushcross Grange in Yorkshire, visits his landlord Heathcliff at his remote moorland farmhouse, Wuthering Heights. There he meets a reserved young woman, later identified as Kathy Linton, Joseph, an ill-tempered servant, and Hareton, an uneducated young man who speaks like a servant. Everyone is sullen and inhospitable. Snowed in for the night, Lockwood reads diary entries of the former inhabitant of his room, Catherine Earnshaw, and has a nightmare in which a ghostly Catherine begs to enter through the window. Awakened by Lockwood's yells, Heathcliff is distraught. Lockwood returns to Thrushcross Grange and falls ill. While he recovers, Lockwood's housekeeper, Ellen Nellie Dean, tells the story of the strange family. I feel like I remember that moment in the book, and I remember being very confused. This scene where it was like the ghost of Catherine Earnshaw trying to break into the window, but I don't think it was clear that he was dreaming in that scene. And I remember reading this book and being like, what is going on? What is happening? So yeah, I still remember that, and I remember being mad. Anyway, Nellie's Tale. 30 years later, the Earnshaws live at Wuthering Heights with their two children, Hindley, age 14, and Catherine, 6, and a servant, Nellie herself. Returning from a trip to Liverpool, Earnshaw brings home an orphan, whom he names Heathcliff. Heathcliff's origins are unclear, but he is described as like a gypsy, and possibly a Lascar. What is that? Or is it Luscar? I'm going to say Luscar was a sailor, a militiaman from the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, the Arab world, British Somaliland, and other lands east of the Cape of Good Hope, who was employed on European ships from the 16th century until the mid-20th century. There's a few possible derivations, either an erroneous European use of the Urdu Lashkar army camp or a shortened form of its derivative Lashkar. Okay. The word Luscar. I think it would be Luscar. But if people are saying Lascar, I understand why, but just given the etymology of this, I would think like this would be Lushkar. I haven't come across this word before. I'm not even sure, is this like a derogatory term I should be not saying? Feels feels maybe not great. Anyway, but Heathcliff's origins are unclear. He's described to be essentially not white, I think, and ambiguous where he's from. Earnshaw treats the boy as his favorite and neglects his own children, especially after his wife dies. Hindley beats Heathcliff, who gradually becomes close friends with Catherine. Hindley departs for university, returning as the new master of Wuthering Heights on the death of his father 3 years later. He and his new wife, Frances, force Heathcliff to live as a servant. Edgar Linton and his sister Isabella live nearby at Thrushcross Grange, and Heathcliff and Catherine spy on them. When Catherine is attacked by her dog, the Lintons take her in, but send Heathcliff home. When the Lintons visit, Hindley and Edgar make fun of Heathcliff, and a fight ensues. Heathcliff, banished to an attic, swears that he will one day have his revenge. Frances dies after giving birth to a son, Hareton. 2 years later, Catherine accepts Edgar's marriage proposal. She confesses to Nellie that she really loves Heathcliff, but cannot marry him due to his low social status. Nellie warns against associating with Heathcliff. Heathcliff overhears part of the conversation and, misunderstanding Catherine's feelings, flees the household. Distraught, Catherine falls ill. I do also remember this. This is dumb. This was dumb. I thought this was stupid. Anyway, Mr. and Mrs. Linton, the parents of Edgar and Isabella, both die of fever. By Mr. Linton's will, the Thrushcross Grange is entailed. Is this entailed? Fee, tail, or entail is a legal concept and a set of associated rules restricting the manner in which real property passes from one generation to the next. So, Thrushcross Grange is entailed to be inherited by Edgar's male heirs or otherwise by the heirs of Isabella. 3 years after his departure, with Edgar and Catherine now married, Heathcliff unexpectedly returns, mysteriously wealthy. He plays upon Isabella's infatuation as revenge on Edgar. Enraged by Heathcliff's presence at the Grange, Edgar banishes him. Distraught, Catherine locks herself in her room and refuses food for 3 days. At Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff exploits Hindley's gambling addiction, becoming mortgagee of the estate. Heathcliff elopes with Isabella, but the relationship fails and they soon return. Heathcliff visits the gravely ill and pregnant Catherine in secret. She dies shortly after giving birth to a daughter, Cathy. Heathcliff rages, calling on Catherine's ghost to haunt him. Okay, yeah, so there was a ghost. I remember being very confused about the ghost thing in this book. I remember being told in high school, hey, we're going to read this Victorian novel. And then there was a bunch of ghosts. It was just this one ghost, but I was like, what is happening? Anyway, Isabella, bitter over Heathcliff's obsession, flees south, where she gives birth to Heathcliff's son, a sickly boy named Linton. Hindley dies 6 months later of alcoholism, and Hareton, Wuthering Heights, although Heathcliff takes possession. 12 years later, after Isabella's death, the still sickly Linton, a prospective inheritor of Thrushcross Grange, is brought back to live there, but Heathcliff insists that his son must live with him. Cathy and Linton develop a relationship. Heathcliff schemes to have them marry, hoping to control Cathy's inheritance. And on Edgar's death, the couple live at Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff becomes increasingly wild, revealing that, possessed by Catherine, he had opened up her grave both after her burial and at Edgar's. When Linton dies, Cathy, his widow, has no option to remain at Wuthering Heights, locked in hostility to Heathcliff. Having reached the present day, Nellie concludes the ending. Lockwood moves away, returning 8 months later to pay his rent. Nellie, now the housekeeper at Wuthering Heights, updates him. Cathy sought Hareton's forgiveness, their reconciliation leading to love, subsequently confronting Heathcliff with unlawfully taking both their properties. Overmastered, declining physically, and increasingly fixated by the dead Catherine, Heathcliff avoided the young couple, as he could not now bear seeing Catherine's eyes, which they both shared, looking at him. He eventually stopped eating, and some days later was found dead in Catherine's old room. Hareton has reclaimed Wuthering Heights, and Cathy has been teaching him to read. They plan to marry and move to the Grange, of which she is now the undisputed owner. With Joseph left to take care of Wuthering Heights, locals report having seen ghosts of Catherine and Heathcliff together on the moors. Lockwood seeks out the graves of Catherine, Edgar, and Heathcliff side by side, and is convinced that all three are finally at peace. So I still hate this plot. No, I hated this book. I vaguely do remember some of these. I hate this book. And it feels like it's not a love story. I don't really understand where the love story takeaway is coming in for people. Everyone's terrible. Everyone sucks here. Heathcliff, terrible. And yeah, I do remember that. It feels like a weird inheritance issue. It's like families fighting about who inherits the land, which is also like icky. And it was weird and confusing when I read the whole book. And even the little synopsis here, I was like, I'm also still confused. What's going on? And those are still my feelings about this book. My feelings about this book are still, what is going on? What's going on? Okay. As a family tree, I don't care. We're curious about the critical response to it, because if I was alive then, I'm alive now and I don't like it. I didn't like it when I had to read it now. If I was alive then and I had to read this book, I also would have been like, what the heck? So I kind of still stand by it. It's like part of the reason this book holds the weight that it does is honestly Emily Bronte's untimely death. The entire Bronte family just like dying really young is crazy lore, to be honest. And I think that's part of it. I've never read Jane Eyre. I probably should. I might like it more. So it could be part of it. But Wuthering Heights ain't it for me, personally. I don't like it. And maybe I'm dumb, you know? Like maybe I'm the problem, because I hated this book. And I don't want to watch the movie. Contemporary reviews. Early reviews of Wuthering Heights were mixed. Most critics recognized the power and imagination of the novel, but were baffled by the storyline. Yeah, no, that's a normal reaction. And objected to the savagery and the selfishness of the characters. Yeah. This is like one of those early... I think there's a lot of things nowadays where people are like, oh, this is really cutting edge or really interesting writing because none of the characters are likable at all. So Wuthering Heights, I guess, ahead of its time. I don't think any of these characters were likable. I don't remember being like, hell yeah, I like these people. I was just like, what is happening? Anyway, in 1847, the background of an author was given great importance in literary criticism. Many critics were intrigued by the authorship of the Bell novels. The Atlas Review called it a strange, inartistic story, but commented that every chapter seems to contain a sort of rugged power. Graham's Lady magazine wrote, how a human being could have attempted such a book as the present without committing suicide before he had finished a dozen chapters is a mystery. It is a compound of vulgar depravity and unnatural horrors. Damn. Graham's Lady magazine. I'm curious about this one. How Wuthering Heights caused a critical stir when first published in 1847, a Telegraph article from 2011. So Wuthering Heights has always been divisive. Even the original book was divisive. Okay, so Spectator in 1847 wrote, the success is not equal to the abilities of the writer, chiefly because the incidents are too coarse and disagreeable to be attractive, the very best being improbable, with a moral taint about them, and the villainy not leading to results sufficient to justify the elaborate pains taken in depicting it. The Examiner, January 8th, 1848. This is a strange book. It is not without evidences of considerable power, but as a whole it is wild, confused, disjointed, and improbable. And the people who make up the drama, which is tragic enough in its own consequences, are savages ruder than those who lived before the days of Homer. We detest the affectation and the effeminate fippery, which is but too frequent in the modern novel, and willingly trust ourselves with an author who goes at once fearlessly into the moors and desolate places for his heroes, but we must at the same time stipulate with him that he shall not drag into light all that he discovers, of course and loathsome, in his wanderings, but simply so much good and ill as he may find necessary to elucidate his history. It is interesting, even in these reviews, they definitely think that the author of Wuthering Heights was a man as they're writing it. And I think they are like, they could have been a bit more modest in their writing. This is like a little too graphic in some of the violence, and even like, I think some of the sexuality that's depicting for the time is pretty out there, controversial. So I think that's the sort of Victorian mentality coming through there. January 15th, 1848. What may be the moral which the author wishes the reader to deduce from his work? It is difficult to say, and we refrain from assigning any, because, to speak honestly, we have discovered none, but mere glimpses of hidden morals or secondary meanings. In Wuthering Heights, the reader is shocked, disgusted, almost sickened by details of cruelty, inhumanity, and the most diabolical hate and vengeance, and anon come passages of powerful testimony to the supreme power of love, even over demons in the human form. The women in the book are of strange, fiendish, angelic nature, tantalizing and terrible, and the men are indescribable out of the book itself. Atlas, January 22nd, 1848, wrote, "We know nothing in the whole range of our fictitious literature which presents such shocking pictures of the worst forms of humanity. There is not in the entire dramatis persona a single character which is not utterly hateful or thoroughly contemptible. Even the female characters excite something of loathing and much contempt. Beautiful and lovable in their childhood, they all, to use a vulgar expression, quote, turn out badly." Patterson's Magazine, February 1848. "We rise from the perusal of Wuthering Heights as if we had come fresh from a pest house. Read Jane Eyre is our advice, but burn Wuthering Heights." Damn. All right, I'll give Jane Eyre a go. I will, actually. I think I should read Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Graham's Lady Magazine, July 1848. "How a human being could have attempted such a book as the present without committing suicide before he had finished a dozen chapters is a mystery. It is a compound of vulgar depravity and unnatural horrors." I don't know. Maybe I just have Victorian taste, because I do agree. Okay. So some of the themes in Wuthering Heights. Marxist critic Arnold Kettle sees Wuthering Heights as a symbolic representation of the class system of 19th century England, with its concerns with property ownership, the attraction of social comforts, marriage, education, religion, and social status. Driven by a pathological hatred, Heathcliff uses his enemies, their own weapons of money and arranged marriages, as well as the classic methods of ruling class expropriation and property deals. Later, another Marxist, Terry Eagleton, in Myths of Power, a Marxist study of the Brontes, further explores the power relationships between the landed gentry and the aristocracy, the traditional power holders, and the capitalist industrial middle classes. Race. There's been debate about Heathcliff's race or ethnicity. In the novel, Heathcliff is first described as dark-skinned with black eyes, and as well as later being said to be as white as the wall behind him, and pale with an expression of moral hate. So I'm confused. Yeah, I mean, I do remember this being like a big discussion in the book. And so it is a strange choice to adapt Wuthering Heights and make Heathcliff like a conventionally attractive white man, because a lot of what Bronte writes about Heathcliff in this, it's not just his class status and the fact that he was adopted, but it's sort of the fact that he's like ambiguous ethnically in Britain at this time that also leads to the discrimination and the adversity that he faces. And I think to adapt this and make Heathcliff just like conventionally attractive white guy takes a large part of what that character's experience would be for this time period. I think Heathcliff not being white and not having white privilege in Victorian England is important for understanding this character, right? So on one hand, yeah, like I do understand the controversy of having adaptations make him white. A lot of adaptations have, so maybe it's just how far we've come that people are like, why? This character's not supposed to be white. Novelist Carol Phillips suggests that Heathcliff may have been an escaped slave, noting the similarities between the way Heathcliff is treated and the way slaves were treated at the time. I think Wuthering Heights actually, like, of all of the things, if you're going to adapt this, Heathcliff not being a white man in this era is a very important part of this book. It's a very important thing to capture in these characters, in how they approach the world, right? Bronte makes it explicit that by 1804, Liverpool merchants were responsible for more than 84% of the British transatlantic slave trade. Heathcliff's race as ambiguous, and argues that Emily Brontë deliberately gives us this missing hole in the narrative. Interesting. Love. One 2007 British poll presented Wuthering Heights as the greatest love story of all time. However, some of the novel's admirers consider it not a love story at all, but an exploration of evil and abuse. Helen Small sees Wuthering Heights as being both one of the greatest love stories in the English language, and at the same time one of the most brutal revenge narratives. Some critics suggest that reading Wuthering Heights is not a love story, not only romanticizes abusive men and toxic relationships, but goes against Bronte's clear intent. Moreover, while a passionate, doomed, death-transcending relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw Linton forms the core of the novel, Wuthering Heights consistently subverts the romantic narrative. Interesting. There's a whole bunch of themes. All right. There's a lot of adaptations of this book. I'm kind of over it. Yeah. I do remember this Death Cab song. And I think I'm kind of tapped out on the Wuthering Heights lore, to be honest with you. So that is all I got in me to research about Wuthering Heights. I don't know if my thoughts and feelings about Wuthering Heights have really changed that much. I do say that there were deeper themes about Wuthering Heights than what we really fully explored when I was in high school. I think it was presented when I was in high school as more of like a reading comprehension type book to be able to even follow along with the chronology of the book, with the Victorian writing of the book. The plot and the story, especially for the time that it was in, and thinking that like most people assumed that a man was writing it, it adds some intrigue to it. I do think that there is a significant part of the long-standing sort of reverence towards this book is honestly because of the Bronte family themselves. All of these sisters initially writing under pen names as men, and it being revealed later that they were all women. They were all three sisters who wrote, and the family is pretty tragic. They all died pretty young. So I do think that's a part of it. I do think that a big part of this book being as famous as it is people feeling some type of way about Emily Brontë and her untimely passing, and feeling like what could have been if she had a chance to just keep writing. But this book in isolation with none of that context, it wasn't for me. But not all art is for everyone, and that's fine. And that's also probably why I will never watch the Wuthering Heights movie. I know there's a lot of drama surrounding it still, and it just is not it for me. And that's okay. The irony is I probably look more like Heathcliff than any of the people who have been in the adaptations. I don't know what else to say about it, really. That's my takeaway. I didn't like this book. And if other people do like it and they really enjoyed it and it means something to you and there are deeper themes that resonate for you, that's great. That's wonderful. Not for me. So if you made it this far and if you liked it, give it a like, maybe subscribe for future deep dives into things. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. I think I'm just going to call it there. I have been recording for a full hour, so this will be fun to chop up. Great. Heathcliff overhears part of the conversation and, misunderstanding Catherine's feelings, flees the household. I do also remember this. This is dumb. This was dumb. I thought this was stupid. Heathcliff unexpectedly returns, mysteriously wealthy. Okay. I'm confused even trying to read the plot synopsis. I'm trying to work it through in my brain.